There are moments in the spiritual journey that are hard to explain, mainly because, on the outside, everything seems normal. You still pray. You still talk about God. You still listen to worship songs. You still show up, still say amen, still carry the appearance of someone who is holding on. But inside, something has changed. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic fall or a conscious decision to walk away. It was more subtle than that. The intensity slowly faded. The excitement you once felt when you prayed became less frequent. The spontaneous desire to talk to God was gradually replaced by a sense of duty. You still pray, but it's not like before. Before, there was expectation. There was desire. There was that sense that you were connecting with someone real, alive, present. Now, many times, prayer feels mechanical. The words come out, but your heart doesn't seem to follow at the same pace. When you finish praying, the feeling isn't peace, it's "I did my part." Excitement turned into obligation. And that scares you, but you rarely talk about it. Because admitting it feels dangerous. It feels like spiritual weakness. It feels like ingratitude. So you keep going on autopilot, hoping that at some point the fire will come back the way it used to be. But while you wait, another shift happens. The presence that once felt so clear now feels like silence. You speak, and feel no response. You seek, and feel no closeness. You continue, but without that emotional certainty that God is near. What makes it harder is that no one on the outside notices. You've learned how to maintain a spiritual routine. You know the right words. You know how to behave like someone who is doing well. But inside there's a quiet emptiness you try to ignore, hoping it's just a quick phase. Except time passes, and the feeling remains. You don't want to walk away from God. You don't want to abandon your faith. You don't want to turn your back on any of this. In fact, part of you keeps trying, insisting, returning, seeking. But another part of you is tired. Tired of not feeling anything. Tired of trying to force enthusiasm. Tired of pretending to yourself that everything is the same. Then a quiet question shows up. Is something wrong with me? You start analyzing yourself more. Trying to figure out when you lost that intensity you used to have. Trying to remember when faith stopped feeling alive and became something you just maintain. But faith almost never disappears all at once. It rarely leaves with a dramatic gesture or a clear decision. Most of the time, it fades in silence. It weakens behind the scenes of the soul while life goes on, while routines continue, while you're still trying to do everything right. And that's why it hurts so much to notice. Because you're still here. Still trying. Still present. But deep down, you feel that something that used to be alive is now just surviving. Spiritual cooling almost never arrives loudly. It doesn't warn you, doesn't set a date, doesn't come with a dramatic moment that divides your life into before and after. Instead, it settles in quietly, discreetly, almost unnoticed. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. You keep living normally while something important is shrinking inside. One of the first signs is a decreased desire to seek God. You still seek Him, but not with the same willingness. Before, there was initiative. You set aside time, you had hunger, you felt like you needed that moment. Now, seeking depends more on circumstances than on spiritual desire. If there's time left, you pray. If the day is busy, you put it off, and that later becomes more and more frequent. It's not rebellion. It's loss of intensity. Another sign is more distractions and less depth. You notice you're always busy with something: your phone, videos, conversations, tasks, worries. Silence starts to feel uncomfortable, so you fill it. Not necessarily with wrong things, but with too many things. Your mind never stops, your heart never slows down, and without realizing it, you drift away from the moments when you could truly listen, reflect, pray calmly. Life becomes too noisy on the outside, and too shallow on the inside. Spiritual tiredness also begins to show up, but in a hard-to-explain way. It's not just physical fatigue. It's soul fatigue. You think about praying and already feel tired before you even start. You think about reading something that would bring you closer to God and feel an inner resistance, as if it requires energy you don't know where to find. It's a quiet heaviness. You keep functioning, working, studying, talking, sometimes even laughing. But when it comes to your life with God, everything feels like it takes more effort than before. What used to be natural now feels heavy. What used to be joyful now feels like duty. Then comes a sign almost no one notices. You begin to avoid silence. Moments of quiet, which used to be opportunities to connect with God, start to feel uncomfortable. In silence, you notice the emptiness. In silence, you feel the distance. So without realizing it, you keep your mind constantly occupied. Music all the time. Videos one after another. Endless scrolling. Anything to avoid being alone with your own thoughts. Because deep down, you know that in the silence you'll realize something isn't right. The problem doesn't start when you completely stop. It starts long before that, when you're still doing the right things, but without life, without depth, without real presence. It begins when the heart slowly cools while the routine stays intact. The problem doesn't start when you stop. It starts when you grow cold. This cooling doesn't come out of nowhere, and it doesn't happen because God suddenly stepped away. Most of the time, it's the result of a slow internal process that quietly changes the foundation of your faith without you noticing. Understanding why this happens is the first step to keeping the flame from going out completely. One major reason is when faith becomes based almost entirely on feelings. At the beginning of the spiritual journey, emotions play an important role. You feel peace when you pray, you get moved when you hear something about God, you sense comfort in hard moments. These experiences are real and strengthening. The problem starts when, without realizing it, you begin using those feelings as the main thermometer of your faith. If you feel something, you think you're close to God. If you don't, you think something is wrong. But emotions are unstable. They change with tiredness, stress, problems, routine. When faith depends too much on them, any emotionally dry season already feels like a spiritual collapse. The absence of feeling gets interpreted as the absence of God, and little by little, that weakens your confidence. Another factor is unmet expectations. You prayed for changes that didn't happen. Asked for answers that took too long. Expected doors to open, situations to improve, pain to lessen, and nothing changed the way you imagined. At first, you insist. Later, frustration sets in. And that frustration doesn't turn into open rebellion, but into quiet discouragement. You still believe in God, but you stop expecting as much from Him. Without realizing it, disappointment cools your surrender. Prayer no longer carries the same expectation. Seeking no longer has the same intensity. Not because you stopped believing completely, but because you got tired of getting your hopes up and not seeing the results you wanted. At this point, God's silence starts turning into doubt. Not an outspoken doubt, but a constant question in the back of your mind. Is it worth continuing? You don't say it out loud, maybe not even clearly to yourself. But this uncertainty slowly weakens your consistency. Little by little, you pray less, get involved less, surrender less. Doubt doesn't destroy your faith all at once, it wears it down. And while all this is happening, routine swallows the spiritual. Work, studies, bills, responsibilities, problems, distractions. The day fills up, the mind stays busy, and God gets pushed into the leftover spaces, which almost never exist. It's not a conscious decision to drift away. It's an accumulation of small choices that always put the urgent ahead of the important. In the end, faith doesn't die from a lack of God. It weakens from excess noise, hurry, untreated frustration, and a spirituality based more on feelings than on decisions. Faith doesn't die from a lack of God, but from an excess of distraction. There's a point in this cooling process that's more dangerous than all the others. It's not when you fail. Not when you question. Not even when you feel empty. The most dangerous moment is when all of this starts to feel normal. At first, the distance bothers you. You notice you don't pray like before, and it weighs on your conscience. You feel spiritually colder, and that brings guilt. You realize you've lost your enthusiasm, and that still hurts. This discomfort, as unpleasant as it is a sign that your faith is still alive. Something inside you knows it's not supposed to be this way. But if nothing changes, the heart starts adapting. You keep living, solving problems, fulfilling responsibilities. Days go by, weeks go by, and that sense of emptiness no longer stands out as much. Praying less becomes routine. Thinking less about God becomes normal. The lack of spiritual depth stops being a concern and becomes just the way life is now. And that's when the risk increases. Because when emptiness no longer bothers you, you stop fighting it. Before, you noticed the distance and wanted to return. Now, you just live with it. There's no more desperation, but there's no real seeking either. Faith wasn't denied, it was quietly set aside. At this stage, God starts becoming more of a memory than a presence. You still believe. If someone asks, you say you have faith. Maybe you still go to church, still keep some religious habits. But real connection, honest conversation, daily dependence, that has been left behind. God stops being someone you walk with and becomes someone you've heard a lot about, but barely experience in the present. You didn't consciously reject faith. There was no dramatic decision saying, I don't want God anymore. It was something much more subtle and, because of that, more dangerous. You just let the flame fade. Stopped feeding it. Stopped protecting it. Stopped noticing. And when you realized, only barely warm embers were left. The greatest danger isn't falling, it's getting used to lying on the ground. Someone who falls still feels the impact. Someone who gets used to the ground starts believing that place is enough. Spiritually, that means settling for a shallow life, without depth, without hunger, without real pursuit. And the longer you stay there, the harder it seems to get up, because the lack of intensity starts to feel like peace, when in reality it's apathy. If you're listening to this and realize this phase describes exactly what you're living, don't ignore this warning. And subscribe to the channel, because here we talk about these silent parts of faith that almost no one has the courage to expose, precisely to help you notice before the flame goes out completely. Still being bothered is a sign of life. And while there is life, it's possible to reignite the fire. If you've made it this far and saw yourself in all of this, there's something very important you need to understand. Simply realizing it already changes everything. Total indifference doesn't ask questions. A completely cold heart doesn't worry. Someone who has truly lost their faith altogether usually doesn't even feel the absence anymore, because they no longer miss it. But you do. You feel the distance. You recognize the emptiness. And even if it hurts, that pain is clear proof that there's still life inside. Feeling the distance is proof that you care. If God meant nothing to you, this phase wouldn't bother you. You would just go on with life without thinking about it. But something inside you still reacts, still questions, still wishes things were different. That shows the flame may be weak, but it hasn't gone out. And as long as there's an ember, there's the possibility of fire again. Another truth that brings hope is this: God doesn't move away at the same speed we do. Many times, we're the ones who slow down, get distracted, grow cold little by little. But God doesn't change position with the same instability as our hearts. His love doesn't fluctuate based on your spiritual performance. His presence doesn't disappear because you're going through a dry season. Even when you feel far, He remains near, sustaining, preserving, waiting for the moment you consciously turn back to Him. A new beginning, then, doesn't start with a big emotional experience. It doesn't begin with a perfect service, an overwhelming prayer, or an intense feeling. A new beginning starts with an honest step. A simple prayer, sometimes without beautiful words, just real ones. Something like, God, I drifted. I'm cold. But I still care. Help me come back. That sincerity makes room for rebuilding. It's not intensity that restores faith, it's truth. Rebuilding also doesn't happen all at once. Just as the cooling was gradual, Strengthening usually is too. One day you decide to pray again, even without feeling like it. The next day, you choose to pay more attention, reduce distractions, create small spaces for God in your routine. Simple actions, repeated consistently, begin to reignite what seemed lost. Solid faith is built in daily life, not in isolated emotional peaks. Maybe your faith isn't dying. Maybe it's asking to be rebuilt the right way. And that's not the end of your spiritual story. It may actually be the beginning of a less superficial faith, less dependent on intense moments, and more rooted in decision, consistency, and real relationship. The faith that almost goes out can come back stronger than before.